Don't fuss, Margaret. Middle seat, 34E, by the lavatories. That's where you belong on this family's dime. My mother snatched the boarding pass out of my hand at the Air Canada counter and threw it on the floor of Pearson International, and it skidded against my boot like she'd been practicing the throw her whole life. She stood 3 feet away, holding a fan of business class tickets she'd just handed to my brother and his wife, and her mouth curled the way it always did when she was performing for an audience. "Look at her," she said, loud enough that half the check-in line turned. "Business class isn't for someone who shuffles spreadsheets for the federal government and still rents a 1-bedroom in Scarborough. You'd embarrass us up there. You wouldn't even know what to do with the warm nuts." My sister-in-law laughed into her oat milk latte. My brother checked his Cartier watch like the whole scene was eating into his schedule. The gate area went quiet the way a room goes quiet right before something happens. I didn't bend down to pick up the boarding pass. For 6 years, I had been the one quietly covering the mortgage on my mother's house in Oakville, the one who'd wired my brother the working capital that kept his marketing agency from folding during a bad stretch in 2022. The one who paid for my niece's hockey camp every August through a numbered company my family had never once thought to ask about. 6 years of folding myself, smaller and smaller so the people I loved could feel bigger. That morning at Gate 174, the daughter who folded herself smaller finally stood up straight. I reached into my coat and pulled out a Navy ID card with a red diagonal stripe, walked past my mother without a word, and presented it to the RCMP officer stationed at the priority security point. His eyebrows went up. He said something into the radio clipped to his shoulder, and 30 seconds later the floor near the secure corridor doors started to hum with the sound of boots. 4 members of Canadian Forces Military Police came through that corridor in step, formed a loose perimeter around me, and a major I didn't recognize snapped to attention and saluted so sharply it cracked the air. "Lieutenant Colonel Castellane, ma'am, your departure window opens in 20 minutes. The Challengers fueled and waiting on the military apron. My mother's face went the color of skim milk. If you've ever had to stand in an airport, or a kitchen, or a hospital waiting room, and finally stop shrinking for people who never once asked how your day was, hit that like button, because to understand why I let this happen in front of 300 strangers, you need to understand what the 6 years before it actually cost me. It was Thanksgiving weekend, the second one I'd spent driving up from CFB Trenton instead of flying somewhere warm like a normal person with 3 days off. I pulled my F-150, the one with 210,000 kilometers on it and a check engine light I'd been ignoring since spring, into my mother's driveway in Oakville at 4 in the afternoon, straight off a 30-hour rotation running signals intelligence, out of a windowless room I'm not allowed to describe in any detail. My mother opened the door in her good cardigan, the one she only wore for company, and looked at my truck like it had personally insulted her. "Honestly, Margaret, could you not have borrowed something decent for one weekend? Your brother's partners from the agency are coming for dinner, and you've parked that thing where everyone can see it from the dining room." She didn't ask about the drive. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. I backed the truck around to the side of the garage, out of sightline of the good china, the way I always did. Inside, the dining room smelled like sage and brown butter, and the table was set for 14. My brother's agency partners and their wives, my sister-in-law's parents up from Burlington, my niece and nephew, who'd been raised since they could talk to treat me like the cautionary tale at the end of the table. I had a spot at the far corner with a plate that didn't match. Chipped along one edge, the only one in the cupboard that wasn't part of the good set my mother had registered for at her own wedding 31 years ago. My niece, who is 7 and has never once been told to mind her manners, pointed at my plate and whispered to her mother, "Why does Auntie Margaret get the broken one?" My mother sliced the turkey and set the best piece, the breast meat, dead center on my brother's plate. "For my brilliant boy," she said, pitching her voice for the partners to hear, "the one who built something from nothing." From nothing. I'd wired his agency $41,000 through a numbered holding company 18 months earlier, the week before payroll would have bounced and 3 senior people would have walked. He told his partners it was a private equity bridge loan from a contact in Calgary. He's never once asked who the contact actually was. My mother turned the carving knife toward the carcass and hacked off the dry, stringy piece from near the wing, the part you usually feed to the dog, and dropped it on my chipped plate. "White meat's better for your figure anyway," she said. "Your desk job has you sitting all day. No man wants a soft, broke government clerk." My sister-in-law smirked into her wine. One of the agency partners, a man named Mr. Aldous, who I'd later learn ran a venture fund out of King Street, leaned over and asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, my mother cut in. "Oh, she does something with paperwork at National Defense. We don't really get into it." Mr. Aldous nodded politely and spent the rest of dinner with his back angled toward me. After the meal, my brother handed our mother the keys to a Lexus RX, leased, though nobody at that table would ever say the word least out loud, and she wept like he'd cured something. Then she reached into her apron pocket and slid an envelope across the table until it bumped my water glass. President's Choice coupons, she said. Some are expired, but the cashiers at the Oakville store take pity if you make a small scene. Don't be too proud to use them. My sister-in-law laughed out loud. My nephew, 12 and proud of it, leaned across and said, "My dad calls you the family disappointment when you're not around." He said it like he was handing me a gift. 14 people at that table, and not one of them said a word. Under the tablecloth, I had my work phone face down on my knee. It buzzed once. A notification from the secure banking app I use for the trust, reminding me the next mortgage payment on my mother's house, $2,600, was scheduled to clear in 4 days. 6 years of combat and standby pay, hazard allowances from 2 deployments most of this family doesn't know happened, routed quietly into a trust that kept the lights on in a house where I wasn't allowed to sit at the good end of the table. My thumb hovered over the screen. Not yet, I told myself. Not on their schedule. My mother clinked her glass and announced the family trip. Cancun over the holidays, an all-inclusive resort suite for my brother's family, a junior suite for herself and for me, a hostel 11 kilometers from the resort that she'd already booked and emailed me the confirmation for, seeing no one. And Margaret, she added, pointing her glass at me, you're on luggage duty at the airport. All 6 bags. Your brother's back has been bothering him. My brother nodded gravely, as though letting someone else carry his suitcases were a documented medical condition. I excused myself, walked out past my truck, still parked in the dark beside the garage, and drove the 4 hours back to Trenton with the radio off. Somewhere past Belleville, I stopped thinking about canceling the trust payment and started thinking about timing instead. Back on base that night, I scanned into the building where I actually work, not the office in Ottawa my mother believes I commute to, filing requisition forms, and changed out of the thrift store cardigan I wear specifically because it photographs as harmless. I bought it for $19 at a Value Village in Belleville for exactly that reason. Underneath it, my service dress hung in a locker with the maple leaf and crown of a lieutenant colonel on the shoulder boards, earned over 14 years, 2 tours, and a scar on my left side from a vehicle-borne IED outside Kandahar that the Army surgeons still talk about in teaching rounds. I have 26 letters in a shoebox at the bottom of that locker. Letters I wrote my mother during my first deployment when I was 26 and scared and trying to sound brave on paper. I found out 4 years later, from a neighbor who recognized the Canadian Forces return address, that she'd never opened most of them. They went straight into the recycling with the flyers. The $200 money orders I'd sealed inside a few of them, sent home so she'd have something extra for groceries, were gone. The envelopes were intact. She'd simply never read far enough to find them, just rinsed the cash out of habit and tossed the rest. That's the part nobody at that dinner table knew. The blind trust I'd set up through my financial advisor in 2018 had moved just over $310,000 in 6 years. The Oakville mortgage, my mother's property tax, the bridge loan that kept my brother's agency solvent, my niece's hockey camp, my nephew's braces. Every dollar of it dressed up in someone else's story so nobody had to know it came from the soft, broke government clerk at the end of the table. I poured 2 fingers of rye, neat, and let it burn. At 6 the next morning, the operations floor lit up. A signals anomaly had been crawling through a federal contractor's network tied to a power authority substation outside Toronto for 9 days dormant waiting. We had under 48 hours before it could cascade into the grid, feeding half the GTA over the holiday weekend. Hospitals, water treatment, the works. I was the lead on the response. In the middle of issuing a quarantine order, my personal phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Reminder, buy your own sunscreen for Cancun. Don't even think about touching your sister-in-law's organic stuff. She paid $45 for it. I was coordinating a national infrastructure response, and my mother was rationing me out of a bottle of sunscreen. She called 2 minutes later and didn't say hello. Had I requested the time off properly? I was to carry all 6 bags by hand, not on a cart, because my brother's back. I wasn't to order anything at restaurants because it's embarrassing when you just get water. And I'd be watching the kids every evening at the hostel so the adults could enjoy themselves. When I said something had come up at work and I might be delayed, she laughed. It's a desk job, Margaret. Nobody gets fired from filing forms. I swear you're the laziest person I ever raised. My commanding officer, Brigadier General Okonkwo Reyes, is a woman who once coordinated a casualty evacuation under fire outside Kabul with a piece of shrapnel still in her forearm. I hung up the phone and didn't say a word. I am deploying undercover for the Toronto leg of this operation, I told her an hour later, standing at attention in her office. I'll be traveling commercial under my civilian identity unless the threat escalates. She flipped through my movement file and stopped on a printed Air Canada economy itinerary a junior analyst had mistakenly stapled to my classified travel brief. Seat 34E, she read aloud. Middle. by the lavatories. She looked up at the maple leaf on my shoulder. You are commanding a Tier 1 response to a threat against this country's power grid, and you are scheduled to sit in the worst seat on a -8 because a civilian wants you to carry her luggage. I told her everything: the trust, the mortgage, the bridge loan, the hockey camp, the dinner table, the chipped plate, the coupons, the letters in the recycling bin. Things I'd never said out loud to another human being in 14 years of service. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she set her coffee mug down hard enough that it cracked against the saucer. You're the finest intelligence officer I've trained in 20 years, she said. I've watched you stay steady while people shot at the building you were standing in. And you're telling me you can't tell your own mother no? She picked up her secure line and called Air Mobility at CFB Trenton directly, ordered a Challenger 604 fueled and standing by at the military apron at Pearson by departure morning, and slid a Navy card with a red diagonal stripe across the desk toward me. You are not flying commercial, she said. You are a protected asset on an active national security file. A security detail will meet you at the gate. You will not carry anyone's luggage. That is a direct order, Lieutenant Colonel. Stand up straight. On departure morning, the black Suburban pulled up to my building before sunrise. My mother was already pointing through the window at the cargo space, warning me not to scratch the leather handles on the matching luggage set, because my salary wouldn't cover it. My old back injury, the one from a hard landing in Wainwright a decade ago, flared as I loaded all 6 bags myself while my brother adjusted the radio and my sister-in-law checked her nails. Inside, my mother, my brother, and my sister-in-law took the captain's chairs. The kids sprawled across the middle row with their tablets at full volume. My mother jerked a thumb toward the rear. Squeeze in with the bags, she said. We need the legroom. I folded myself into the gap. A hard suitcase corner pressed straight into the scar tissue along my ribs. The rear vent had been shut. My nephew threw a granola bar wrapper over his shoulder and it stuck in my hair. My sister-in-law turned, saw it, took a photo, and I heard the message tone go off in the front seat a second later, followed by a laugh. When the driver pulled up to the priority drop-off at Pearson, my mother turned around with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair like a crown. When we're inside, you walk 10 paces behind us, she said. Your brother has people from the agency on this flight. I won't have them thinking we associate with the help. Do you understand me? That was the line. Not the chipped plate, not the coupons. Walk behind her like the help, in front of 300 strangers, on the morning I'd spent 6 years quietly keeping her afloat. The dutiful daughter, standing in the cold beside that Suburban, finished dying right there in the drop-off lane. I carried the bags through the terminal exactly 10 paces back, just as instructed, while my mother walked ahead with her chin up and my brother's arm around his wife like the king of something. At the counter, she snatched the boarding pass from her bag and threw it at my feet the way she'd been wanting to all morning, and started in on me in front of the line, in front of Mr. Aldis's wife 2 desks over, in front of a gate agent named Priya, whose face told me she'd seen plenty of cruelty in this job, but maybe not quite like this. 38 years old, she said, voice climbing, and you don't even own a condo. Your brother was a millionaire at 31. You're an embarrassment to this family. Pick up your ticket and sit where you belong. I didn't bend down. What replaced the woman who would have bent down was someone who'd spent 14 years learning that stillness, used correctly, is its own kind of authority. I walked past my mother to the RCMP officer at the priority checkpoint and presented the Navy card. Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Castellan, I said. Tier 1 asset. My security detail is expecting me. The floor near the secure corridor began to hum. 4 members of military police came through in formation. The major saluted, and somewhere behind me my mother's voice cracked into something I'd never heard from her before. Confusion that had nowhere left to land. Did you steal someone's identification, she said, grabbing my brother's sleeve. Whose card is that? Are we going to be arrested? She could not, even with the proof standing in front of her, imagine a version of me that wasn't the soft clerk who said thank you for dry turkey. A family, I said, loud enough to carry, because by then half the gate had their phones up. 6 years ago, I started paying your mortgage. I funded my brother's agency the year it nearly collapsed. I bought hockey camp and braces and Christmas, and every single time, you told me to walk behind you so your friends wouldn't see the help. You gave me coupons at your own table while I sat on the only chipped plate in the house. You let your son tell his kids I was the disappointment. I let the silence sit there longer than was comfortable. You didn't teach me to stand up straight. The Canadian Armed Forces taught me that. You didn't teach me what I'm worth. The people standing around me right now did. Keep the seat by the lavatory. It suits how you've always treated the people who actually carried this family. Nobody clapped. A dozen phones were still recording. My mother sank toward the floor, and my brother didn't move to catch her. Just stood there with his mouth open and nothing coming out. Because somewhere in the last 90 seconds, the golden boy had understood exactly whose money had been holding up his life. I walked through the security doors and didn't look back, and the last thing I heard before they sealed was her voice breaking on please. By the time the Challenger leveled off over Lake Ontario, the video was already moving. Someone, Priya, maybe, or one of Miss Aldis's people, had posted a 12-second clip, and within 3 hours it had climbed past 400,000 views with a caption that read, "Watch a mother humiliate her own daughter at Pearson, then watch the Canadian Armed Forces show up for her." Two of my brother's agency partners pulled their accounts from his firm publicly by the next afternoon. His biggest client, a national grocery chain, quietly let his contract lapse the following week. My mother's name came off the volunteer board at the Oakville Hospital Gala Committee within the month. No explanation given, none needed. My phone filled with messages I didn't ask for. My mother, first apologetic, then bargaining, "I'll pay you, just take one photo with me in your uniform for the neighbors, name your price." Then my brother, "Call me, we can fix this," like 19 years, 6 years, however long it had actually been, was a billing dispute. My sister-in-law, accusing me of traumatizing the children. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years calling me selfish for embarrassing the family. I didn't write anyone a paragraph explaining myself. I blocked them one at a time, then opened the banking app and canceled the trust. 4 taps. The mortgage payment that had quietly kept a roof over a house I wasn't allowed to sit comfortably in stopped mid-cycle. I had a grid threat to finish neutralizing, and by the following Tuesday it was contained. The substation isolated, manual overrides in place before anyone outside a very small circle ever knew how close it had come. Half of Mississauga went about its week with hot water and working traffic lights, and never once knew what that cost, or who'd spent 3 days without sleep making sure of it. My family, meanwhile, was busy losing a leased Lexus and a board seat. I saw my mother once more, 6 weeks later, at my grandmother's place in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where she'd gone to stay after the bank started calling about the Oakville house. She was thinner. Her hands shook when she reached for mine across the kitchen table. "I'm your mother," she said. "You can't just turn that off." "I didn't," I told her. "You did, every time you handed me a coupon and called it generosity. I'm not angry that I helped you. I'm done being ashamed for having to." She didn't have an answer for that, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wait around for one. I drove back to Trenton with the windows cracked and the cold October air coming in off the lake. And somewhere past Grimsby, I realized my shoulders had finally come down from around my ears, like they'd been waiting 14 years for permission.